Welcome back to the Apprentice One-to-One podcast. I'm your host, Mark, and I'm being joined with my other co-hosts this evening. We've got Richard and Craig. How are you first, Craig?
Yeah, good, thanks. You?
I'm very well, thank you. I had an unexpected trip back to your homeland earlier this week, but I'm not going to talk about that because I'll just end up swearing. And how are you, Richard?
Very well, mate. Thanks. Flat out, as always. You know what it's like teaching and all that in colleges. But yeah, all good. Done some good stuff this week. Working on some new stuff for next week. Never stops. But yeah, all good. Very well, thanks. Yeah.
Good stuff. Good stuff. And just to say to everyone who listens to the podcast, Richard's going to be appearing a bit more regularly. He's agreed to come and serve his time, and he's expend his sins by talking with me more regularly. So we're going to get him on the podcast a bit more often as well. Today, we wanted to have a little chat about the 8202 and 2365 routes, and that's off the back of the podcast I did with Craig Wiltshire. I don't know if either of you two have managed to listen to that one at all, but there was a few interesting points that came up for that, and I had quite a lot of engagement from retrainees who were asking for some content specific to them and those routes. So we thought we'd dig into that a little bit, and I know that's not your area of expertise, Richard, but I think, Craig, you've had a fair bit of experience of those routes along the years.
Yeah, I've done a bit. We can certainly talk around it and then we can see where that leads us, because I haven't listened to your podcast with Craig yet. I've not had a chance, but it'll be interesting to see what came up from that area and what we can do to help people in that situation and answer the main differences, because the long and short of the 8202 and the 2365 is they are very similar. They lead you to kind of the same outcome, but you get there with two completely different methods, which is what becomes a bit more confusing for some people. So I don't know where you want to start with that really and how you want to go through it, but yeah, we'll share what we can.
It was kind of from that point, really, mate. It's I've read a little bit around it. Is the 2365 sort of similar to the apprenticeship in the way it's set out in modules, and the 8202 is more, I don't know how you really word it, but it's not really a module-based learning system.
Yeah, so the 2365 is, because when people talk about apprenticeships, there's a couple of parts that make up the apprenticeship. You and Richard will be able to attest to some of this as well. Is you've got the technical certificate. So the current apprenticeship standard's called the 5357 for electrical, and it's all level 3. You have the technical certificate part of that, which is what they do when they go to college 1 day a week. That's when they pick up most of the learning for that element. That a specific part of the apprenticeship is near on exactly the same as the 2365 for the learners that go to college, say 2 or 3 days a week.
Got you.
If they do units on the 2365 or the 8202, if they then were to gain an apprenticeship, those units can map across back into the apprenticeship. So although there's different unit codes and different qualification codes, effectively year 1 of an apprenticeship is like doing a level 2 in college. The years 2 and 3 is like doing the equivalent of the level 3 in college. The bit that makes the apprenticeship different is obviously the work experience that's gained with it and the portfolio that those who are in college would need to leave college and then go on and do an MVQ following that. So then when you take that and you look at the difference between the 2365 and the 8202 is, as you say, the 2365 is now an older qualification and on its way out as far as funding is concerned. When you're talking about colleges, it's not a very fundable qualification anymore because it was written around about 15 years ago, I think. So it's still talking about things kind of 15 years out of date. Whereas the 8202 has come out in the last, I want to say it's come out in the last 3 years, 2 to 3 years. Not a huge amount of change, but the main change being the assessment, like you say. The modular style of assessment is kind of moved now, and it's what they call a synoptic assessment. So you learn all year across all your theory and all of your practical, and then you have an exam window, which is now a written exam rather than a multiple choice exam. So you get some questions are multiple choice, some are short worded answers, some are long worded answers. And that happens around about February, March time, I think. So you do all your learning across all your units as you would have done previously, but instead of having a health and safety exam, then a science exam, then a technology exam, You just have one exam which encompasses all of that knowledge into that exam. Colleges don't see the exam, so it is sent out like A-level exams and things to your exams department. They open it in a controlled room, it's filled in, it goes back in an envelope, and it goes back to City and Guilds, and every one of those exams is centrally marked by City and Guilds themselves. So as lecturers now, yes, we know the type of content that would be in there because of teaching the qualifications for a period of time, but we don't actually see the exam papers until after the exams have taken place. And I'll come back to that point in a minute. You then have between April and June, I think it is, you have your one attempt at your practical assessment, which is a set assessment that City and Guilds provide every year. And that is the assessment that you have to do during that time. And because it's Synoptic, you get one more attempt at the paper-based exam, which happens around about July time, I think. But you cannot retake the practical until the following April or May the year after.
Wow.
And you cannot assess anybody outside of those windows, which is why a lot of private training providers won't take that qualification to use it, even though it's more up to date, is because it doesn't suit the business model of being able to do exam resets and run courses whenever you want, because regardless of type of centre, those dates are fixed by City and Guilds, and everybody doing the 8202 sets the exam on exactly the same day, regardless of if it's your normal college day or not. If you don't attend that exam session at Tuesday morning at 9 o'clock, you miss your exam for the year. So it obviously starts to affect pass rates and fail rates and all of that sort of thing that comes with it. When I said we don't see the exam until after the exam, that's because once the 2 exam windows have been sat, City and Guilds then publish sort of the examiners or markers comments, if you like, of the exam for that year, because it then changes for the year after, which, given a bit of a prompt and shout out to Joe Robinson, he's just started doing video series on last year's marking guides as to how they got to the answers that they got to for the qualification overall, which is freely available on City and Guild's website to download for anybody doing that. You can go back and look at all of the previous theory exams that have taken place. So that's the main difference, I guess. Fundamentally, the content's the same. Fundamentally, they're going to college, it's the same. But the exams is a huge, significant change for people depending on what course they're on.
Yeah, so the 2365, they would kind of sit a health and safety exam, and then that's that unit ticked off. Don't need to look at it again. Move on to the next unit. Whereas the 8202, it's all left to the end. So you've got to kind of return that knowledge. I like the sound of that better, to be fair. But that's interesting you're saying about private training providers and FE providers. I guess that creates a bit of a difference in who's offering these courses. If you're saying that the private trainers are going to be more pushed towards a 2365, with it not being funded, they'll be seeking people to pay for that, I guess. Whereas an FE college might be looking to apply for funding and putting people on the 8202. Is that right? Or is that a basic understanding I'm getting wrong?
No, that's right. So, and this is a difference when people talk about colleges and training providers. I'm not sitting saying one's better than the other, but colleges run purely off of funding paid to them by the government. So every year, the government releases a table of what qualifications it's going to fund for the following year. So I know 2 years ago, because I think they put it back in, that for adult learners, the government stopped funding the level 3 to 365. So to private training providers where everybody's paying them money, that makes no world of a difference. They've not discontinued the qualification. They're just saying that a college can't claim government funding to teach it. So colleges all had to make the move over to 8202 because that was the only way they could fund students to get the qualifications, because that's how we generally operate 95% of our business. Whereas if you're not claiming funding, it's probably not the logical option to go for, because if you've got everybody can only sit their practical once a year, and if they fail it, they can't sit it till the following year. I'm no businessman, but I imagine that doesn't do your profits much joy.
No, and I guess the logistics of organising that for the number of students you might have in your centre aren't particularly easier either. So a couple of downsides to that straight away for them.
And I think that becomes the issue. But both qualifications, if you go on City and Guilds website, they actually have a table on there that you can look at, which says if you've done X amount of units under 2365 or 8202, then these are the units you do not have to do in the apprenticeship, or the 2357 MVQ, for example. And it's a direct table that lists all of the referencing and cross-referencing over so that people know where they stand, so that if they have done 2 years in college, for example, they can then go into, say, a second or third year of an apprenticeship because they've done all the theory units that the apprentices would have been doing on their day a week coming into college.
That's really interesting. You've explained that very, very clearly, Craig, and that's actually blown my mind because I've never actually had that set out to me like that, to be fair, that there is that distinct difference now as you've set it out like that. Starts to wonder if the learners are at the center of this, or if it's more, without being too crude, money driven. If the 8202 is the course that industry's looking at and kind of putting in to replace 2365 is the way I'm kind of reading around it. You know, why are these older courses still being offered that are maybe 15 years out of date? Do you have any experience of that at all, Richard, or is it something you've not touched on in your career?
No, so there's a few other considerations you've got to consider. So previously, I've dealt with the 5357 when it was the Trailblazer. So I set that course up 3 years ago or so when it kind of first came out. And Craig's quite right in what he says, is that you can approach any of the units in any order that you want, but obviously there's a preferred sequence I like to follow. So you either do block release or day release. So this is looking at the apprenticeship framework. Day release is obviously more difficult because you're trying to get the learners to retain the knowledge. However, block release, day release, and then you've got a number of units, and the units are generally the same across all the quals, whether it's, you know, 8202 or 2365 or whatever. You've got City and Guilds, and of course you've got EAL. So the 5357 in terms of City and Guilds, you're always going to have a health and safety unit, science and principles unit. You're going to have an organising and planning unit. You're obviously going to have the regs unit. You're going to have design. You're going to have the terminations unit. You're going to have the testing unit and the fault finding unit. So I used to run it health and safety unit first. So all about health and safety. There's some practical assessments as an online exam. Then I did the science unit, science and principles. That's everything from, you know, magnetism to DC motors to machines to efficiency to phasor diagrams to AC theory to all that amazing stuff. Then I did organising and planning. So in the first year, I used to do those 3 units. In the second year, when they've had a year on site, they've gained a bit of knowledge, organising and planning, and they've looked at plans, drawings, site drawings, they've looked at delivery notes, they're familiar with who the different roles are on site, all that stuff. The start of the second year, I start with the regs. And the regs is obviously the same qualification that everyone does, 2382, 22, whatever it is now. Once you've done the regs, I then do the design unit, because you can't design if you don't know or have an understanding of what you're designing to, which of course is the standard, which is the regs. So in the 5357 unit, the design unit, the 104 unit, it's a massive unit. You've got to do an online exam, and that's looking at all the different wiring systems. It's looking at maximum demand diversity, all the stuff around design. They've also got a design a hotel project, which I used to really like. Reminds me of my old C certificate I did many, many years ago.
I don't think it's changed since then.
No, so you've got plans of a hotel, and they have to decide what lights they're going to put where, and number of socket outlets. There's cable calcs. You've got to go to manufacturers and get information. You have to think about external influences. Brilliant. That used to take us 4 weeks to do that with the learners. Really, really good. Then in the third year, we did terminations, and that really is AM1 as it was back in my day. Nice little job in the workshop. It incorporates all the different wiring systems, 2 weeks to do that. In the fourth year, then we used to do the testing unit, because that gives them 3 or so years on site, and the fault finding unit. After the 4 years, then roughly after that, they'd then go and do AM2. But you can do those units any way around you want. But because they're apprentices, the consideration you got to think about is that they should be familiar with most of the stuff that you're talking about, because they're apprentices, because they're on site. Whereas the 8202, 2365, I'm currently running the EAL advanced diplomas, level 2, level 3. These lads and ladies have never been on site. So the learning is a lot more difficult, and they've got these synoptic assessments, EAL, very similar to City and Guilds, written paper, exam, and they have to be done in a certain window, because certainly with the EAL, the EQA, the external quality assurance guy, is going to come, he's going to make sure that everything's been set up correctly. He's going to make sure that we're being fair, consistent, all the equipment, the tools, the learners know where they are, they know the appeals procedure and all that stuff. But to retain all that knowledge across all of the units is very difficult. Whereas if you're just doing health and safety, you'd retain the knowledge with health and safety, you do the exam. To retain all that knowledge across the whole year is difficult, especially when these learners don't really know what you're talking about because they've never been on site. So it's real difficult. I believe that the 5357 will change very soon to incorporate synoptic assessment as opposed to end of unit assessment. So certainly with the AAL qual I'm doing currently, been with Guilds for a long time, did AAL before that with GAS way back when. It's the same quals that I used to do with GAS, but there was no synoptics then, and it was difficult to get everything in then. Now you've got to do these synoptics at the end. And I was trying to explain to my level 3 group today that, you know, everything we do, the notes that you make, access to all the delivery on Teams and all that stuff, you're going to build yourself, if you're clever, a folder, and you're going to get some index markers from Tesco, whatever it is, and you're going to mark a note, make notes with all of the different outcomes within each unit. So when you come to your synoptic at the end, you're already planned and prepared, and you've got everything you need to help you, because I can't tell you what's coming in the exam, because as Craig quite rightly says, we don't actually know. So it is quite difficult to plan and prepare and get them ready for absolutely everything. But, you know, it is difficult. And some of these lads, they've not ever picked a screwdriver up, you know, they've never picked a hacksaw up. And I'm not saying the apprentices have, but certainly they're on site all the time. You know, they're watching great mentors like yourself, and, you know, the sparks that have got time to spend with the lads, then they're going to gain so much knowledge. And I do feel bad for some of these lads, the full-time lads that can't get an apprenticeship, and they're trying desperately. And that's, of course, where you've done your great thing, trying to help people get into the industry, to get into industry. And it's difficult. It's a tough one, I think. But
it really is. And like you've hit on pros and cons there, both of you, in the way the 8202 and the 2365 were laid out. You know, I was instantly thinking in terms of a learner's point of view, retaining that knowledge is maybe a good thing for your long-term understanding it, whereas just remembering it to pass a particular unit. But like you've said, that, you know, the delivery of that from the lecturer's point of view, and, you know, maybe it's not a set in stone one way or the other. Maybe there's a happy medium somewhere. But the wider problem that I see on a day-to-day basis is that a lot of younger people are put onto either a 2365 or what is the 8202 now, because they can't get apprenticeships.
Yep.
They don't really want to be there. And like you've said, they're not getting the on-site experience to really learn in and around that qualification. So I think there's a problem in industry to deal with that as a separate thing. It's the actual difference in all of the courses to start with. I don't know if you both saw that in teaching students, or if that's just something I've seen because of all the complaints I get.
Go on.
There's very few people come to the college and say, I'm here because I didn't want to have an apprenticeship. I mean, if you look at a makeup of my last department that I was looking after for electrical, we had 250 full-time people and probably 100 apprentices, and that's in North London. You know, London's a big place with a busy industry. You would think that would be flipped on its head, because I would say that 90% of those that were in college on a full-time course would have taken any opportunity for an apprenticeship to do it that way rather than to do it full-time in college. Whereas if you go back to when most of us were training, or sort of when you were leaving school with, you know, with people's dads and things, everybody got an apprenticeship, right? Everybody went out, had an apprenticeship, you trained, you learnt a trade, and then you went off and carried that on and done your day's work. The thing I would say, where they're trying to make it fair with the exam, but I'm not sure is a good angle, if I'm honest, is the reason it's centrally marked by City and Guilds, and I'm guessing by EAL as well, is that they don't publish a pass mark until they've gone through everybody's papers, and then they take a mean average of the result. So you might have one year where people might be passing with, I don't know, 25% of the questions right, and the next year it might be 60%. It literally varies. Wherever they can get the number that they are aiming to get, they kind of draw a big line down the paper. And it's going back to school like they do with GCSEs and A levels, because the 8202 now does go on to performance tables like A levels and things, so does then start to carry UCAS points for university, and so it's kind of not really electrical specific, if you like. It's looking at using that as an education to give you other options as you move forward, rather than just people joining the trade.
AEL is exactly the same. Each assessment and each unit, they can either get a pass, a merit, or a distinction, and you add the figures up from each of the exams and each of the units, and in the end you get a percentage, and then that'll determine whether they get a pass, a merit, or a distinction. So, you know, as you say, the more you get, the more UCAS points you obtain. So that's where they're going with it, really.
Which for me has a good and a bad, because are we now looking at in the industry, instead of going out and being straight onto tools, are we going to have people looking at design avenues? Are we going to have people being electricians that then go on to be site managers or architects or QSs? There are all these other potential avenues. Are we maybe widening the options by people who maybe wouldn't have got a university place through A levels and stuff before, having a kind of second chance to get those points to go and do that sort of industry? Or, you know, I don't know where that goes, but it certainly gives people another option, doesn't it?
Is that like the tie-in with T levels? That was a buzzword not long ago, T levels, and then it seems to have died a death. I don't hear that mentioned very often anymore.
I think
T levels are still there. They're coming in. They're a funny one, because now I'm out of education, I suppose I can say I don't know if they're better or worse for the industry as far as apprenticeships are concerned. Because if I'm an employer now and I'm looking at, you've got somebody who's in college 4 days a week, 3 days a week, and they have to do, I think it's 45 days a year of work experience. Well, if I look at taking 2 of them on, I've effectively got a full-time apprentice where I don't pay anything because it's work experience, and I don't know if that's going to boost the apprenticeship system or start to crumble it, if I'm honest.
Yeah, it de-incentivise employing apprentices, I suppose, if you can get them in for free, doesn't it? So you maybe...
Well, if you've got Craig Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and you've got, I know yourself, Mark, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and we have a crossover day in the middle, and you don't have to pay a penny, but you've got a full workforce, does it really make you rush out to gain apprentices?
Yeah, it's a tricky one when you put it like that, isn't it? Because you know what employers will generally do.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's a tricky one. One of the really hard aspects of all of this, and again, it comes back to the work in and around it all. People are on these courses, younger people, because they can't get apprenticeships at the start. And then when they come to the end of that training, be it a 2365 or the 8202 or the EAL variant, they still supposedly need to go off and complete a portfolio before they can do their AM2 and getting that experience. We just had a chat on a little Discord thing we were trying for the first time tonight before this, and there was a learner on that in that exact scenario, like asking questions of what's the best time to find that employment or how you seek it. And that's a really, really hard thing for industry to solve, because there must be thousands of people coming out of 2365s, EALs, level 3s, 8202s every year, and they're just in the employment pool taking them on, from what I've seen. I don't know quite what we do to fix that.
Yeah, interesting. Where does the path lead after they've, you know, gained those level 2 or level 3 knowledge qualifications then, you know, because you say without the apprenticeship or the portfolio or the on-site experience, the road doesn't lead anywhere, really, does it? They'll always stay, you know, either a mate or an improver, as it used to be called, you know, in the eyes of industry. They can only get kind of a labourer's card, can't they, to get on site? So difficult one. As I say to my lads, you know, what makes you different to somebody else? Why is an employer going to look at you? What have you done different to somebody else? You know, because ultimately an apprenticeship, gaining that experience is a much better way to go as opposed to a level 2, really, you know, or a level 3. It's still the same knowledge, don't get me wrong, but you back up your knowledge, you underpin it with site experience. Because if I'm talking about, you know, tray or conduit or something like that, they look at me as if I'm from another planet. They haven't got a clue what I'm on about. They don't, because of the terminology we use every day, they don't really understand what it is you're talking about. Okay, you can show them all sorts of stuff. And I try and make my knowledge as interesting as I can by having lots of props and bits and pieces to show them. But ultimately, it's simulated. It's simulated. I can walk around the college and the workshop and the joinery workshop and everywhere else and show them this type of wiring system, that and the other. But it's so difficult. It is difficult. I don't know how you fix it. I don't know.
And it's sad that our industry is effectively taking it that I have to say to all learners on level 3, the best way, as soon as you start your level 3, enroll on your NVQ, and you're just going to have to give your time up for free to gather your portfolio so that by the time you leave, you can then apply for a gold card. It's a shame that we're saying the only way you can really get a job in the industry is if you can afford to give your time up for nothing on your weekends or your evenings or whenever it may be, to be classed as qualified. I know that term's a buzzword, but CPSs have all said about MVQs and stuff now, so it's not a slant at anyone. And ultimately, the only way you achieve that to be able to do the job you want to do is by giving a load of time up, because the portfolios are not small. They're not one job and you're done. It's a good year, if done properly, of jobs and evidence. I think it's 7 types of wiring, 5 types of containment, and then testing and fault finding and calibration certificates and all these other bits and pieces that isn't just giving up one Saturday to get a job.
I think that's such an important message to share, because lots of training providers will just say, oh, when you're finished, you've got to go do your portfolio. It'll take you a few weeks, maybe a couple of months, and then away you go. You can get your gold card and start sparking. And that's just not the reality. Filling in that portfolio and getting it complete, if you're going to do it properly, like Craig said, it takes time. You need the opportunity to do it. And I don't know if maybe training providers should be more involved in that process and having firmer links with some employers to offer students that prospect later on, or if the CPSs need to be involved somehow, because obviously they get a steady pool of people coming into their enrolment via those routes. I don't know, or whether we should just look more closely at producing those apprenticeship positions we need. Hopefully we're going to see a bit of that as time moves along. But yeah, it's really difficult. It's one of the common questions I get in apprentice one-to-one all the time from people on retrainee routes separate to apprenticeships. And I don't know the answers, which is why we have these discussions, I suppose, to see if we can come up with some consensus between people in industry.
It always feels like topics like this just leave you with more questions than answers, really, doesn't it?
They do, yeah. But as you quite rightly say, Craig, you've got to have that or gain that experience on site, and unfortunately, sometimes you're going to have to give that time for free. You're going to have to, because if you're going to do it correctly, and it should always be done correctly, it should actually be done on site. I do know of a bit of fudging that's gone on, and I've been partial to the conversation on the phone. Oh, it's okay. Just put a bit up in your garage. That'll be fine. We'll sign that off. That's not a problem. Just stick a bit on your wall in your garage. Like a 30 centimeters of conduit. That'll do. Not doing anything. We'll tick that off. That will suffice. This is the problem. Why the industry is the way that it is.
And then
training is a massive part of it.
And then you get where we are now, where you can't find enough good skilled sparks to take the command of what we're doing. So we are fully 360 degrees shooting ourselves in the foot.
Yeah, it seems to be the way, doesn't it? And that whole way of assessing work and building portfolios, if it's not done right, defeats the object, doesn't it? So sticking stuff up in your garage, you can get a bit of work experience around friends and family, and maybe get working with other contractors. I'm not saying you shouldn't invest in yourself, and doing work for free is that you're investing in your future. But some people don't even have that opportunity. They've offered themselves out for free, and they still can't find that experience because people just aren't interested in fixing that problem for industry. They're too busy focused on their own daily lives, and it's understandable. We've all got our own pressures and work commitments. It's not up to individuals to solve all these industry ills and problems, isn't it? So I don't know, it's really, really tough. If you are on those learning routes yourself, there's been a few podcasts we've put out about getting a bit of experience in the agency sector, maybe. As Craig said, get yourself known that you are willing to work for free around other local contractors. Get involved with discussion in your wholesale network. See if your trainers can help you, because often like Craig, now he's working out in industry, they might have an opportunity to offer you some experience in their day jobs outside of training. It's quite common that lots of lecturers do run contracting businesses of their own or work in those environments. So those discussions are worth having as well. If we can help, we will at Apprentice 1-to-1, so get in touch. Is there anything else either of you two would like to add on that topic before we move on? Because there is something else I would like to ask you both before we end the podcast.
I just think we need to, if people are interested, we spoke about setting up more days where we go to bigger projects and kind of help people get experience that way. It'd be interesting to know if that demand's there. I know we've spoke about it before. We're willing to give our time up and go and help generate something for the college or something and bring people along, but it'd be good to know if that's wanted. And I know it's not how we should have to do folders and all the rest of it, but if that is there and people find it helpful, then to let us know so we can set something up.
Good shout, and we are doing that with focus training. It's been going on for quite a long time, that one. There's been issues with the lecturer moving on to pastures new and then returning, so we're going to go down and do that in December. That's down in Redruth, so down on in the south. If there is anybody who wants a bit of work experience, you can come in and assist us in doing something that we did very similar. We didn't organise this, we just joined in at Walthamstow with Craig probably a year ago now, maybe longer, I lose track of time. Something along those lines. If you want to come and get involved, you can do. And there's other training centres that we're planning on doing stuff with over the coming weeks and months as well. It's a lot of this stuff gets spoken about and then doesn't really lead anywhere. As Craig said, we need to get a bit of action behind some of this. So if there are people who want to be involved, do reach out. If you are a college training provider or wanting that experience at an individual level, do get in touch and we'll make it happen one way or another. I'll ensure we do.
Or even a business that wants something done that's happy to let us train people on it there. We all have all of our own insurances and everything will be done right, but give us access to places and jobs that we can help these individuals would be fantastic.
Tesco's will be on the phone having free car charging points done at our expense before we know it, isn't it?
Yeah,
I don't know
what
what to add, Richard.
Say it again, sorry.
Anything you wanted to add before I ask a little question of you both?
No. I think the more of these, podcasts you can do based on maybe questions that have been asked, or if the platform of that Discord platform we were having a conversation about prior is something we can get involved with and give some advice. If I can help in any way, then no problem at all. That's all we can really do, isn't it? But it is difficult. I don't think you're going to solve all this on one podcast, but
no,
by having conversations about it and giving advice and getting other people involved, I think it's got to be the way forward, hasn't it? And we will start to iron out a few of these bumps and help some of these people that are probably, as you say, a little bit in limbo, really. They might have done 2 or 3 years at college, but they don't really have nowhere to go now, and that's a shame. So it's difficult.
Yeah, definitely. I can see Craig's looking at his front door, so his takeaway might be there any second. So I'm just going to ask this one really quickly, and it's because it's a big topic of industry at the minute. I'm hoping that we're going to get a representative from Trade Skills for You to come onto this podcast and speak about it. But we've seen they've been acquired by City and Guilds. Is there any thoughts that either of you two have on that? Not of a controversial nature, just a first observation.
For me, if it's kept as separate businesses like it should be, because people have to remember City and Guilds as a company has more than just the training side attached to it. If they keep it as separate companies and it's about them delivering high standard courses with new information coming out where they can directly impact the development of qualifications, to see that come back out in the classroom, and I think that would be a good thing, because at the minute the qualification review side of life means that by the time you actually ever get anything reviewed and changed, it's already out of date by the time it's making its way into training in classrooms. So if something can be done by them being the same company to improve that relationship, then I think that would be beneficial. If it becomes a way for them just to deliver backhanded courses and kind of close their own shop around it, that's not going to be good.
When I seen the news last week, I instantly thought conflict of interest, potentially. But, if they are two separate entities, then that's how it should be. But from the face of it, you'll look at it and think, that looks a bit dodgy. But, you know, if the training is correct and it's delivered to a good standard and they maintain the standards in terms of, do they use that information to help develop standards? Is that going to be better? Because Craig's quite right when he's saying that, you know, it does take a long time for City and Guilds to update any of their qualifications, and some of them are quite, you know, old in terms of some of the questions. Some of the information doesn't, you know, align with the current set of standards, the regs and things like that, and you're having to adjust it and adapt it. And EAL is slightly better in that respect, but it could be a good thing, could be a great thing. But equally, you know, there are some alarm bells, or they certainly were ringing when I seen the news. So, you know, that will be one that will pan out, and we'll see what happens with that. But, you know, I mean, trade skills themselves, they're not a small operation, are they? They're quite a big
they're
operation.
ginormous. They're ginormous. Yeah. And that was the reaction that a lot of people had along the lines of what you just said there, Richard. There was a few question marks and doubts in and around it. And I think they're fair, because it's something new to industry. We don't see City and Guilds owning other electrical training providers as far as I'm aware. So it is a unique situation, and one hopefully we will see some answers to at a more detailed level in the coming weeks. I think it's fair for people just to sit and wait on that for the time being, see what they come up with. I have had a chat with the CEO of Trade Skills for You. I'm very, very hopeful that he's going to come on here and answer some of those questions. Fingers crossed, or a rep from that company will do, and we can get to the bottom of it in a fair and reasoned way, because I don't want to hang anyone out to dry and start calling them out as this, that, and the other with no inside knowledge of what the plans are.
No, you also have you also have to have a look at the fact of people may want to throw stones around this situation and be whiter than white, but let's not be different to this scenario. City and Guilds is a business. Everybody pays to register the learners. Everybody pays to certificate the learners. Therefore, if you're a training provider or college, not saying either way, that there's a huge amount of numbers of students through City and Guilds books, or EAL or anybody else, there has always been a conversation or an argument about how much centres get away with based on their volume, because ultimately they are keeping the doors open of City and Guilds. That, to me, doesn't mean that just because City and Guilds don't own somebody officially on paper, if they're putting a high volume of money through that, then they are definitely getting to sit at the table and be involved in conversations that are taking place about all the updates, about the qualifications, about funding bands. And everybody sitting at that table will have some sort of service in themselves. Like you hear of people that own training providers that sit on the boards writing the City and Guilds regs exams, and then they've got the material to sell the courses on day one before they come out. Is that not a conflict of interest?
Yeah, yeah.
Do you know what's?
Yeah, well, it is a conflict of interest, but it happens. We know it does. So,
so I just don't think, whilst I agree there is conflicts, I think there's lots of other conflicts where some people might be jumping up and down and need to look a little bit closer at what their offer is as well before it's kind of tarnished one way or the other. And I think we just have to wait and see how it pans out.
Yeah, I'm hoping it's a positive thing. I'm hoping, you know, because they aren't a small organisation anyway, as they are. Got a lot of centres, you know. I've never done any of their training courses or whatever, so I can't really comment. But if it underpins and changes the way that maybe City and Guilds approach or construct or put together their qualifications, it's got to be a good thing. And I'm hoping that's what it is. And, you know, as you say, let's, you know, get a bit more information and pass that information on. So, yeah.
Yeah, I'd echo that. I think that's fair. And, you know, if City and Guilds are coming into this from the point of view of we can't get industry to change in the way we want by being an external partner to it, or whatever the current arrangement is, we're going to get more directly involved by our own centre and demonstrate exactly what we want and put it in place for others to replicate. That might be the agenda. We don't know. We really don't know.
I suppose I'll ask a question to leave us to end it on, I guess, is, well, is it any different to NAPA or NIC delivering their own training for people to join their schemes?
Yep.
Well, that's been going on for donkeys, and you can all see the results of how that panned out. But fortunately, they seem to have learned their lessons now. So we shall see if City and Guilds have learnt those lessons too.
One last thing. Does a NAPIT certificate, let's say for proving competence in installing solar PV, for instance, does it hold the same weight as a certificate with city and guilds on it?
I think that's the
class
Nern brand.
being the same? Do you know what I mean?
I think they're normally
go on, Craig. Sorry.
So I was going to say, I think they're normally endorsed by them in the background with the rights to run their own and deliver their own training and brand it with their own badge, from my understanding.
But does it hold the same weight? That's what I'm trying to say.
From an employer's point of view, no. I would always look for city and guilds quals. Right. I know even you're delivering the EAL variant, which is just the same now. And I accept from the knowledge I've got from doing these podcasts that is the case. But before these times, if I'd have seen an EAL certificate and a city and guilds one, I would definitely have understood what the city and guilds one was, and I would have been asking further questions about the EAL variant. That's just the way it is. They're a well-known certifying body, I guess, whatever we're going to call them.
Yeah, they've been industry standard for years, haven't they? That's you were so all of my certs are guilds, all of them. So even down to my assessing and IQA quals, I didn't want another qual. I wanted the city and guilds version to go with all my city and guilds electrical certificates, if that kind of makes sense. But you know, EAL, it's equivalent. They approach their assessment slightly different, slightly better than guilds, that but they all lead towards the same occupational standard, don't they? But do the NAPIT ones and the NRC ones, do they hold the same weight? I don't know. I don't think so. But is it the same? Maybe. Who knows? Lots of questions, but more questions and answers.
There's bombshells dropping off in industry every week at the minute, and we're always happy to chat about them on this and other podcasts. Everyone's talking about these things. It's a fun pastime, and if it helps other people along the way, then all the better. We're going to get off now and let Craig go and get his takeaway he's been sat waiting for. I can hear his tummy rumbling from here. We're going to be back again next week to talk about more stuff. I hope you found some value in this podcast. If you want to get involved in the comments, we'll share it out on social media as well. Join in and have a chat with us. We're going to do some more of the Discord stuff that I'll share on social media as well. Thank you both to Richard and Craig. It's been a pleasure chatting with you. And we will see you all on the next one. Bye.
See you, guys.
See you later.